They called him a simple dirt farmer, a nobody who'd married above his station. The whole town of Silver Creek looked down on Joshua Bennett, and they made sure his wife, Clara, knew it. They thought they were shaming a quiet man who worked the land. They had no idea they were threatening a man who could summon an army with a single note from a silver whistle, and they were about to find that out the hard way. The afternoon sun beat down on the community hall, merciless and unforgiving. Inside, the air was even worse, thick with judgment and tobacco smoke. Clara Morrison, who was now Clara Bennett, tried to make herself small on the hard wooden bench. She could feel the whispers like insects crawling on her skin. She'd once worn silk gowns and debated philosophy with professors back east. Now she wore a simple calico dress, and her biggest debate was whether they could afford new seed for the spring planting. "Would you look at that?" The whisper was sharp, deliberately loud. "Sitting there proud as you please, after throwing away her family's good name for a dirt farmer." Clara's fingers tightened on the rough fabric of her dress. Beside her, Joshua sat like a statue carved from prairie rock. His hands, calloused and scarred from work she was only beginning to understand, rested calmly on his knees. But she saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. He heard every word. The whispers grew, feeding on each other like a fire in dry grass. "Her father must be turning in his grave," someone else muttered. "All that education, all those opportunities, and she chooses him." Then came the voice that mattered most in Silver Creek. Mrs. Blackwood, a wealthy widow whose late husband's railroad fortune made her the town's unofficial queen, turned in her seat. She was dressed in imported velvet, defying the oppressive heat, a walking display of power. She fixed Clara with a look of theatrical pity. "Such a shame, dear," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice dripping with false sympathy that was more insulting than any open curse. "You could have had your pick of suitable men. The banker's son from Denver was quite taken with you, I recall. Now look where your romantic notions have led you, a two-room shack and calloused hands." The crowd tittered, emboldened by their queen's disdain. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but it wasn't from shame. It was pure, hot rage. These people saw Joshua's patched clothes and sun-darkened skin, and they stopped looking. They knew nothing of his quiet strength, his gentle hands that could calm a spooked horse, the deep intelligence in his eyes when he looked at the stars. They measured a man by the weight of his purse, and that was a measurement Clara had come to despise. She stood up. The movement was so sudden it silenced the whispers for a moment. All eyes were on her. Joshua's hand twitched, as if to pull her back down, but he stopped. He trusted her. "At least my husband earned his land with honest work," Clara said, her voice trembling but clear. It carried across the entire hall. "Not everyone in this town can say the same." You could have heard a pin drop. The accusation, though unnamed, was unmistakable. Everyone knew whispers of how the Blackwood fortune had been built, on questionable land grabs, on driving desperate homesteaders into ruin, and then buying their land for pennies on the dollar. But no one ever had dared to say it out loud. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "Careful, child," she hissed. "You've already fallen so far. Don't dig yourself any deeper." Joshua finally moved. He stood and placed one of his large, work-roughened hands over Clara's. The gesture was a silent declaration. "You face her, you face me." His deep voice, rarely heard but always listened to, filled the hall. It wasn't loud, but it had the kind of authority that wealth couldn't buy. "My wife speaks the truth," he said quietly. "We may not have much, but what we have, we've earned. I'm not ashamed of that." Sheriff Daniels, who'd been dozing in a corner, suddenly woke up. His allegiance to the Blackwood money was the worst-kept secret in the county. His badge was tarnished by more than just time. "Now, folk," the sheriff drawled, putting on a show of keeping the peace, "let's keep things civil. We're here for community matters." But Mrs. Blackwood wasn't finished. She rose from her seat, her large frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Clara and Joshua whole. "Personal grievances, Sheriff. When members of our community make choices that reflect poorly on us all, it becomes everyone's business. This girl had everything: education, refinement, prospects, and she threw it all away. For what?" She spat the word like it was poison. "Love? Love doesn't put food on the table or keep a roof from leaking. The crowd murmured in agreement, their heads nodding like wheat in the wind. The judgment was a physical weight, pressing down on Clara, suffocating her. This was the moment she had dreaded, the public crucifixion she'd known was coming. "You're right, Mrs. Blackwood," Clara said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "Love doesn't pay the bills, but Joshua does. Every single day, he works from dawn until dusk. Honest work that feeds families in this town. While others sit in their parlors counting money they didn't earn, he's out there, building something real." Just as she finished, a sound cut through the tense air. A whistle, long and low, rolling in from the hills. It wasn't a bird call. It wasn't any signal Clara had ever heard. There was something deliberate about it, something ancient and commanding that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. And the man beside her changed. Joshua's calm posture vanished. He straightened, his body going rigid. His eyes, once fixed on the hostile crowd, sharpened and turned toward the sound. He was a different person, a predator that had just heard the call of its pack, and he wasn't the only one. Across the room, Clara saw others react. The blacksmith's apprentice, a young man who barely spoke 2 words a day, went still. Old Crazy Pete, the prospector everyone ignored, lifted his head, his cloudy eyes suddenly clear. Even the stable hand, a man everyone assumed was deaf, turned his head toward the sound. They all reacted to that whistle like iron filings to a magnet. Mrs. Blackwood, her face a mask of confusion and fury, demanded, "What was that? What is the meaning of this interruption?" Joshua stood slowly, his movements now filled with a lethal grace Clara had never seen. "Sounds like this meeting might be ending early," he said, his voice laced with an edge of cold steel. "Some things are more important than gossip." The whistle came again. 3 short bursts this time. Sharp, urgent. Joshua's face became granite. He turned to Clara, and for a fleeting second, the gentle man she loved was back. His eyes were soft, but only for her. "We need to go home, Clara. Now." "This is highly irregular," Mrs. Blackwood sputtered. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," Joshua said. He took Clara's arm, his grip firm but not painful, and guided her toward the door. The crowd parted before them, a sea of confused and hostile faces. But as they passed, Clara saw something else. The blacksmith's apprentice was already moving, his eyes meeting Joshua's with a look of grim understanding. Crazy Pete was shuffling toward the exit, his gait no longer aimless, but filled with purpose. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long, ominous shadows down Main Street. Joshua helped Clara onto their modest wagon with a sense of urgency she'd never felt from him before. He took the reins, his hands quick and sure. "Joshua, what was that sound?" Clara's voice was a whisper. "Why did those men—" He glanced at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that looked like fear in his eyes. But it wasn't for himself. It was for her. "That whistle means trouble is coming, Clara," he said, his voice low and tight as he urged the horses into a trot. "The kind of trouble that doesn't knock politely at the front door." Behind them, the community hall erupted into chaos. Mrs. Blackwood's shrill voice rose above the din, demanding answers no one seemed to have. As their wagon rattled toward the edge of town, Clara saw them. Riders. Distant figures moving fast across the open range, converging from different directions. Not toward the town, toward their ranch. The whistle sounded one last time, from a new direction, closer now. An answer. Joshua's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles were white. He looked at her, his eyes dark with secrets she was only now beginning to sense. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken history, "remember that I love you, and everything I've done, everything I am, has been to build a life worthy of that love." Clara pressed closer to him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was tangled with a fierce, burning pride. She had chosen this man, this life. She'd thought she knew what she was choosing. A simple man, a quiet life. But as the shadows lengthened and that mysterious whistle echoed through the hills, she realized she hadn't known him at all. The simple rancher she'd married was about to reveal himself as something else entirely. And whatever was coming for them, she was ready to stand beside him. The life she'd known was over. A new, far more dangerous one was just beginning. The ranch house stood against the darkening sky, a small, defiant silhouette. It was a testament to Joshua's hard work, every board cut and nailed by his own hands. Inside, Clara lit the oil lamps, her movements jerky and uncertain. Through the window, she watched Joshua securing the horses, his actions quick, methodical, efficient. He wasn't just putting them away for the night, he was preparing them. He kept scanning the horizon, his shoulders tense, a sentinel guarding a lonely outpost. She moved to the stove to make supper, a habit ingrained from months of routine, but her hands trembled as she reached for the coffee pot. The memory of Mrs. Blackwood's sneering face was a fresh wound, but it was mixing with a deeper, more unsettling feeling. An old life, one she thought she'd left behind, was haunting her. Once she dined on fine china. Once servants had prepared her meals. Once her biggest worry had been which suitor to favor. Had she made a mistake? "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" Joshua's voice from the doorway made her jump. He filled the space, his broad frame a comforting presence, but his face was etched with concern. In the warm lamplight, she could see the lines around his eyes carved by the sun, the wind, and things she was only now starting to imagine. "No," she said too quickly. Then more honestly, "Not about you, Joshua, never about you. But sometimes, I wonder if I was selfish, choosing my own happiness over everything." He crossed the room in 3 long strides. His work-roughened hands, the ones Mrs. Blackwood had mocked, took hers with an impossible gentleness. "You chose honest work and honest love over pretty lies in a golden cage. There's nothing selfish in that, Clara." "But what kind of life is this?" The words tumbled out, a secret fear she'd been nursing for weeks. "What kind of life can we give our children when they come? My family has disowned me. Your family—" She trailed off, a stunning realization hitting her. In 6 months of marriage, she'd learned almost nothing about his family. He'd mentioned parents who died young, a hard life before he'd saved enough to buy this ranch. But the details were a locked box. Joshua's eyes widened, then softened with a wave of tenderness that made her heart ache. "Children?" he whispered, his hand hesitant and reverent, moved to hover just above her still flat stomach. "Clara, are you—" She nodded, tears she hadn't realized were there finally spilling over. "I found out for certain last week. I wanted to tell you properly. Not like this. Not when everything feels so wrong, so uncertain." He pulled her into an embrace that was solid and warm, the very reason she'd given up everything else. He was her home. "Our children will have something worth more than money," he murmured into her hair. "They'll have parents who chose each other, who built something real together. They'll know what it means to work for what you have and to stand tall no matter what anyone else thinks. They'll have a legacy of courage." A thunderous pounding on the door shattered the moment. Joshua released her instantly. The gentle husband vanished, replaced by the man from the town hall. He moved to the window with the fluid grace of a predator, his hand reaching for the rifle mounted above the fireplace. He didn't take it down. Not yet. "Bennett!" A rough voice shouted from the darkness. "We know you're in there. Mrs. Blackwood sent us to collect what you owe." Clara recognized the voice. Tom Garrett, one of Blackwood's hired hands, a man with cruel eyes and a reputation for enjoying his work. Through the window she could see the flickering dance of torches. Dozens of them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. There were at least 15 men out there. Maybe more. "I don't owe anybody anything," Joshua called back, his voice impossibly steady. "You're on my land uninvited. I'll ask you once to leave peacefully." A chorus of harsh laughter was his only answer. "Your land?" Garrett mocked. "Funny you should say that. It won't be your land after tonight. Mrs. Blackwood's decided this little patch would make a fine addition to her holdings. Sheriff Daniels even drew up the papers. Seems you've been defaulting on some taxes you didn't even know you had." Clara gasped. It was a classic, cruel trick. One her own father, a lawyer, had whispered about in disgust. Powerful landowners would invent false tax bills, use their puppet sheriff to file them, then seize the land when the farmer couldn't pay a debt they never actually owed. "Those are lies!" Clara shouted, her voice thin with outrage. "We've paid every tax. I have the receipts right here." "Receipts can burn, little lady." Garrett's voice was slick with menace. Just like houses and barns and everything else that gets in Mrs. Blackwood's way. The sickening sound of splintering wood came from the direction of the barn. Clara peered through the window and saw men tearing down the fence Joshua had spent weeks building. Others were chasing their lone milk cow, laughing as the terrified animal scrambled in the dark. One man held a torch dangerously close to the hay they'd stored for the winter. "Please, Joshua," Clara whispered, her hand finding his arm. It was like holding onto solid oak. "Maybe we should just go. It's not worth this. We can start over somewhere else." "Yes, it is," Joshua said. His voice was quiet, but it held a terrifying intensity. His eyes never left the men outside. "This is our home, our land, our future." His gaze flickered down to her stomach, and a look of such fierce protectiveness crossed his face that it took her breath away. Their future. "I won't run from bullies and thieves, Clara. Not now. Not ever." More sounds of destruction, the chicken coop being overturned, the small vegetable garden she had so carefully tended being trampled under heavy boots. Each sound was a physical blow, dismantling their hard-won life piece by piece. "Last chance, Bennett," Garrett yelled. "Sign the papers the sheriff sent, take the pittance Mrs. Blackwood is offering, and be gone by sunrise, or things get real unpleasant for that pretty, educated wife of yours." That was it. The line had been crossed. Joshua's control snapped. He lunged for the rifle, his face a mask of cold fury. But Clara caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't. That's what they want. They want an excuse to say you attacked them first. Joshua, please, think." He paused, his entire body vibrating with a rage so profound it seemed to make the air hum. In that moment, Clara saw a man she didn't recognize. Not the gentle rancher, not even the tense soldier from the town hall. This was something else. Something dangerous and barely leashed. Something truly frightening. He took a deep, shuddering breath and set the rifle aside. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "I need you to trust me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever happens next, whatever you see or hear, I need you to remember that I am the man you chose. I need you to believe in me. Can you do that?" Clara could only nod, her throat tight with fear. What are you going to do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he went to their small bedroom and knelt, prying up a loose floorboard she'd never known was there. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on worn velvet, were items that made no sense. A stack of old papers tied with a leather cord. A few faded photographs of young men in strange, ill-fitting uniforms. A collection of military medallions she didn't recognize. "I wasn't always a rancher," he said softly, his fingers tracing the edge of a tarnished silver medal. "There was a time when I led men. Good men. Men who trusted me to keep them alive in places the devil himself was afraid to walk. Men who swore oaths that went deeper than any law written on paper." The pounding on the door came again, harder this time, the wood groaning in protest. "Time's up, Bennett." Joshua looked at Clara, and in his eyes she saw the crushing weight of a past he had tried and failed to outrun. "Those men out there," he said, "they think they're dealing with a simple farmer. They're about to find out how wrong they are. But I need to know, when I show you who I really am, will you still be standing here beside me?" "Always," she whispered, the word a vow. He kissed her then, a kiss that was fierce and quick and tasted of desperation and gunpowder. He moved back to the main room, but he didn't go to the front door. He went to the window on the far side of the house, the one that faced away from Garrett's mob, toward the dark, empty prairie. But it wasn't empty. As her eyes adjusted, Clara thought she saw movement, shadows detaching themselves from other shadows, shapes that didn't belong. "One more thing," Joshua said. He reached back into the box and pulled out a silver whistle on a leather chain. It was intricately carved with symbols she'd never seen before, worn smooth in places from years of being held. "This isn't just about us anymore, Clara," he said, his voice grim. "It's about everyone like us. Every small rancher, every honest family just trying to build something. The Blackwoods of this world have taken enough. Tonight, we start taking it back." He raised the whistle to his lips. Outside, Garrett had finally lost his patience. "Burn it!" he roared. "Burn it all down!" But before his men could move, a sound filled the night. It was different from the call they'd heard in town. It was longer, more complex, a haunting melody that was both a lament and a summons. It was a song played in a key that spoke directly to the soul, a promise of blood and brotherhood. And the night answered. Before Garrett's men could take another step, an answering whistle came from the darkness to their left, then another from their right, and another, and another, and another, until the entire prairie seemed to be singing Joshua's song back to him. The mob froze. Their torches wavered as they peered into the suddenly alive darkness beyond their circle of light. The jeers and laughter died in their throats, replaced by a confused, rising murmur of fear. "What did you do?" Clara whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Joshua pulled her close, his arm a band of steel around her. His voice was grim, but beneath it, she heard the cold, hard satisfaction of a plan clicking into place. "I just reminded some old friends," he said as the torches outside began to go out one by one, "that the war isn't always over just because the politicians sign a piece of paper." The shouting outside turned from threats to confusion, and then to screams. Clara held tight to her husband, to the stranger she had married, feeling the solid core of steel she'd always sensed was there, but had never truly seen. The quiet waters didn't just run deep. They concealed a riptide strong enough to drown an army. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving, painting the sky in the colors of a fresh bruise. It matched Clara's mood perfectly. Joshua had tried to stop her, had pleaded with her to stay at the ranch where it was safe, but the Morrison stubbornness, the one trait her father had both cursed and secretly admired, was a fire that couldn't be quenched. She hitched up her skirts and marched into Silver Creek, straight for the sheriff's office. The town was already stirring, the air thick with gossip. She felt the eyes on her back, heard the whispers that followed her like a cloud of flies. "That's the Bennett woman. Heard Garrett and his boys paid them a visit last night. Heard it didn't go so well for Garrett. Serves her right, putting on airs, thinking she's better than us just 'cause she can read a book without moving her lips." Clara kept her chin high, her back straight. Each word was a tiny needle, but her anger was a shield. She wasn't just fighting for her home anymore. She was fighting for her husband's honor. The sheriff's office was a squat, ugly building at the end of Main Street, a monument to false authority. Clara shoved the door open without knocking. Sheriff Daniels was exactly where she expected him to be. Boots on his desk, studying a stack of property deeds that probably didn't belong to him. "Well now, Mrs. Bennett," he drawled, not bothering to stand or even tip his hat. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to report some vandalism, perhaps? Some rowdy fellas causing a ruckus in the middle of the night?" The mock innocence in his voice was so thick it made her want to gag. "You know exactly why I'm here, Sheriff. Tom Garrett and 15 of Mrs. Blackwood's men attacked our ranch last night. They destroyed our property and threatened to burn us out. They threatened my life. I demand you arrest them." Daniel slowly, deliberately lowered his feet to the floor. The chair groaned under his weight as he leaned forward, his face a mask of condescending pity. "That's a mighty serious accusation, ma'am. You got any witnesses to this attack? Any proof it was Tom Garrett and not just some drifters passing through?" "My husband and I are the witnesses. We saw them." The sheriff's smile was as cold and dead as a winter snake. "Your husband, the same husband who, according to several upstanding citizens at yesterday's town meeting, publicly threatened Mrs. Blackwood and her associates? Seems to me if anyone were to press charges, it might just be your husband who ends up in a cell." The blood drained from Clara's face. It was a perfect trap. They'd already twisted the story, painting the victim as the aggressor. They were professionals at this. "That's a lie, and you know it." "Do I?" Daniel stood, his bulk filling the small office, casting a greasy shadow over the wanted posters on the wall. "What I know, Mrs. Bennett, is that Agatha Blackwood is a pillar of this community, a woman of unimpeachable character. If she says you and your husband owe back taxes, then the law says you owe back taxes, and the law is the law." "Then show me the law." Clara's voice rose, her control fraying. Show me the tax bills. Show me the legal documentation that says we owe a single penny more than we've already paid. The sheriff's smile widened, showing yellow teeth. Funny thing about paperwork, ma'am. Sometimes it gets misplaced. Takes a while to find. Could be days, weeks even. And in the meantime, if folks feel unsafe around your husband, if they feel threatened, he let the implication hang in the air like a noose. Disgust and a chilling sense of helplessness washed over Clara. This was how it worked. The law wasn't a shield for people like her. It was a club for people like Blackwood. She turned to leave, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Just then, the door burst open and a figure stumbled in, bringing the scent of dust and whiskey with him. It was old Silas McKenna, the prospector everyone called Crazy Pete. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, split by a grin that showed more gaps than teeth. "Sheriff!" Silas exclaimed, his voice raspy. He blinked, his watery eyes focusing on Clara. They sharpened with a surprising, sudden clarity. "Well, howdy do, Mrs. Bennett. How's that fine husband of yours? Still got the steadiest rifle hand this side of the Rockies, does he?" Daniels scowled. "Silas, this is official business. Get out of here before I—" "Before you what?" Silas's voice was suddenly different. The addled, rambling tone was gone, replaced by something hard and steady. "Arrest me? On what charge? Being old or being grateful?" He turned his full attention to Clara, and she saw an intelligence in his gaze that she'd never noticed before. "Ma'am, did your husband ever tell you about the winter of '74? When my claim up in the mountains played out and I was about to cash in my chips for good?" Clara shook her head, confused but intrigued. She was acutely aware that Sheriff Daniels had gone very, very still. 20 below zero, Silas continued, his voice now a low rumble. Nothing but pride and an empty belly for company. I would have froze solid in that shack. But a young fella came by, a soldier. Didn't say much, just saw I was in a bad way. He shared his rations, though he barely had enough for himself. Stayed 3 days chopping wood, making sure the fire didn't go out. Never asked for a thing in return, just said, "Folks ought to help folks." That was it. "That's a touching story, Silas," Daniels interrupted, his voice tight. "But it has nothing to do with—" "Doesn't it?" Silas met the sheriff's gaze, and for the first time Clara saw Daniels look away. "See that soldier? He carried a whistle, a silver thing. Had these funny little markings on it. Said it was from his unit, a special signal they used. Said the men who carried those whistles were bound by something stronger than any law or country." The old prospector reached into his filthy coat, but he didn't pull out a bottle. He pulled out a whistle. It was brass, not silver, but it had the same strange, intricate carvings as the one Joshua owned. Clara's breath caught in her throat. 43, Silas said quietly, his eyes boring into the sheriff. "That's how many men answered the call last night, Sheriff. 43 men who remember exactly what Joshua Bennett did for them when the world wanted to see them dead or forgotten. You might want to mention that to Mrs. Blackwood. Let her know that some debts can't be paid with crooked paperwork and hired thugs." Silas turned to leave, then paused at the door, a sly, knowing look on his face. "Oh, and Sheriff, funny thing about paperwork. You were right. Sometimes it gets misplaced, and sometimes it gets found. Be a real shame if someone found the records of all those political donations from Mrs. Blackwood that somehow never made it into the town treasury." The old man shuffled out, leaving a thick, ringing silence behind him. Sheriff Daniels' face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. His hands were clenching and unclenching on his desk. "You tell your husband," he finally managed to say, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You tell him that old favors and circus tricks won't protect him forever. This is a new world, Mrs. Bennett. Men like him, men who think honor and loyalty are worth more than cold, hard cash. They're fossils, and fossils get ground into dust." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe so, Sheriff, but at least fossils were once something real, something that lived and breathed and stood for something. What are you, besides Mrs. Blackwood's well-fed pet?" She walked out of his office before he could respond, her heart hammering but her spirit soaring. The world had just tilted on its axis. Joshua wasn't just a former soldier, he was a leader, a hero to men like Silas. And there were 42 others just like him, hidden in plain sight, waiting. As she walked back through town, she started to see it. The blacksmith's apprentice met her eyes from his forge and gave a slow, deliberate nod. The stable hand, the one she thought was deaf, tipped his hat with unmistakable respect. They knew. They were all part of it. The town that had seemed so solidly against her was in fact a battleground of secret loyalties. Silas was waiting for her at the edge of town, his posture straighter, his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Walk with an old man a spell, ma'am?" She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "Thank you," she finally said, "for what you did back there." "Weren't nothing but the truth," Silas chuckled. "Your husband saved my life, sure enough. But that ain't the whole of it." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "That unit he was in, they weren't just any soldiers. They called themselves the Gray Wolves. Special operations. The kind of work that doesn't get mentioned in the history books. When the war ended, the Army officially disbanded them. But bonds forged in that kind of fire, they don't break. And a lot of them settled around here, scattered across 3 states, living quiet lives as farmers, prospectors, shopkeepers, trying to forget. But they never forgot the whistle. And they never forgot what it means when a brother calls for help." Silas stopped and placed a weathered hand on her arm. "Your husband, Sergeant Bennett. He gave us all a reason to live when the world told us we were nothing but used-up killers. He gave us back our honor. That's a debt that never gets paid off." Clara thought of Joshua, so quiet and gentle, and tried to reconcile that man with the leader of this secret brotherhood of dangerous men. "He's never told me any of this." "Reckon he hoped he'd never have to," Silas said softly. "A man tries to build a new life. He doesn't want the ghosts of the old one rattling at the door. But people like Mrs. Blackwood, they can't stand to see a man like your husband just be. They see strength, they want to break it. They see dignity, they want to buy it. They see love, and they want to prove it's worthless next to gold." They had reached the turnoff to her ranch. In the distance, she could see Joshua, a lone figure, patiently repairing the fence Garrett's men had destroyed. "You tell him Silas McKenna remembers," the old man said, his eyes distant with memory. "You tell him the brass whistles are spreading the word to the silver ones. Tell him the Gray Wolves never forgot their promise." He looked at her, and his smile was suddenly sad. "When one calls, all answer. When one stands, all stand." "When one fights, all fight," Clara finished, the words coming to her lips as if she'd always known them. Silas's smile returned, wider this time. "You'll do, Mrs. Bennett. You'll do just fine." He turned back toward town. "A storm is coming. Make no mistake. But Mrs. Blackwood wanted to wake a sleeping dog. She's about to find out she woke a whole pack of wolves." Clara watched him go, then turned toward home, toward her husband, toward the man who held more secrets than the mountains themselves. The battle for their future hadn't even started, but now she knew they wouldn't be fighting it alone. The old mineshaft was a dark, gaping mouth in the side of the hill, exhaling a cool breath that smelled of damp earth and forgotten secrets. Joshua led her inside, the lantern in his hand pushing back the oppressive darkness, revealing groaning timber supports and walls that wept with moisture. "My father worked this claim before the vein ran dry," Joshua said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "After he passed, everyone forgot it was here. Everyone but me." He led her deeper, past rusted ore carts and the ghosts of abandoned tools, until they reached a natural cavern at the end of the tunnel. And what she saw there made her stop in her tracks. Shelves had been carved into the rock walls, their contents protected by carefully draped oilcloths. It was an arsenal, a museum, a tomb. "After the war," Joshua began, setting the lantern on a rock ledge, "I needed a place to put the man I used to be. Things I couldn't throw away, but couldn't live with either." He pulled back one of the cloths. Inside were stacks of military papers wrapped in waxed canvas, faded photographs of young, serious men in uniform, and hand-drawn maps marked with routes and positions that were meaningless to her, but had clearly meant life or death to him. In the center, on a bed of worn velvet, lay a silver whistle. It was older and more ornate than the one he carried, its engravings telling a story in a language of symbols she couldn't read. "This belonged to Captain Marcus Wade," Joshua said, his voice thick with reverence. "The best man I ever knew. He gave it to me at Antietam. He was gut shot and knew he wasn't going to make it. He told me the whistles were more than just signals. They were a promise, an oath sworn by every man who carried one." He touched the whistle, his fingers trembling slightly. "I was just a sergeant then, 22 years old, trying to keep 30 men from dying in a war that ate boys for breakfast. But Captain Wade, he saw something in me. He taught me that real leadership wasn't about shouting orders. It was about earning a trust so absolute that men would follow you into the mouth of hell and ask what was for dinner." "The Gray Wolves," Clara whispered, the name Silas had spoken. Joshua nodded. "Special reconnaissance. We were the Army's ghosts. We did the jobs no one else would, went places no one else could survive. We'd spend weeks behind enemy lines, living off the land, gathering intel that saved thousands of lives. The brass called us reckless. Our enemies called us devils. We just called each other brothers." He gently placed the captain's whistle back and picked up a worn leather journal. "I wrote down the name of every man we lost, every mission, every close call, every life saved. It's all in here. The official records were sealed. What we did was too irregular for the history books. This is our real history." Clara took the journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. She opened it to a random page and saw Joshua's younger, neater handwriting describing a daring night raid to rescue prisoners. In the margins, other hands had added their own notes, their own memories. It was a living document, a testament to shared sacrifice. "After the war, we scattered," Joshua continued, his voice distant. "Some of us went home to families who didn't recognize the strangers we'd become. Others had no home to go back to. But we all kept our whistles, and we all kept the promise." "But you chose this," Clara said, gesturing vaguely at the world outside the mine. "You became a rancher. You left all of this behind." "I tried to." His smile was full of regret. "I bought this land, figured I'd raised enough hell for one lifetime. It was time to raise cattle instead, to build something instead of tearing it down. And for a few years it worked. The other wolves did the same, became farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, anything but soldiers. We were done with fighting." He moved to another section of his hidden cache, pulling back a larger oilcloth. Clara gasped. Weapons. Not just rifles and pistols, but specialized equipment she couldn't even identify. Strange knives with hidden compartments, collapsible rifles, small, intricate devices that looked both brilliant and deadly. "Then men like Mrs. Blackwood started moving in," Joshua said, his voice hardening into flint. "Pushing people out, taking their land with crooked lawyers and hired guns, destroying lives. And I realized the war never ended. It just changed its uniform. Instead of blue and gray, it wears bankers' suits and judges' robes. Instead of cannons, it uses foreclosures and thugs." A sound from outside made them both freeze, the crunch of boots on the rocky path leading to the mine. Instantly, the rancher was gone. Joshua doused the lantern, plunging them into absolute darkness. He pulled Clara behind him, and she heard the slick, metallic sound of a pistol being drawn. It had come from his boot. How had she never known he carried it there? "Bennett," a voice called from the entrance. "It's Marcus Thompson. Silas told me you'd be up here." Joshua relaxed, but only slightly. "Come in slow, Marcus, and come in alone." A tall, lean man stepped into the mine shaft, blinking as his eyes adjusted. He was dressed like a prosperous merchant, but he moved with the quiet efficiency of a hunter. His eyes, however, belonged to a soldier. They missed nothing. "Joshua," he said, his gaze taking in the hidden cache. He nodded at Clara. "Ma'am, a pleasure to finally meet the woman who managed to tame our sergeant." "Marcus ran the most successful supply raids of the war," Joshua explained to Clara. "Now he runs the most successful general store in 3 counties. Funny how the skills transfer." Marcus's smile was thin and sharp. "Speaking of skills, we've got a problem. A big one. Mrs. Blackwood isn't relying on local talent anymore. She's brought in professional guns from Denver. Pinkerton men, or something damn close. These aren't Garrett's drunken bullies, Joshua. These are killers. How many? Joshua's voice was clipped. Professional. 20, maybe more. And Joshua? Marcus hesitated, his expression turning grim. She's got Henry Colton with her. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she felt Joshua go absolutely rigid beside her. The air in the mine suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Colton's dead, Joshua stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. I killed him at Cold Harbor. Apparently not, Marcus replied gravely. Or at least, not permanently. He's older, scarred up pretty bad, and he walks with a limp from where you put a bullet in his hip. But it's him, and he's carrying a grudge that's had 12 years to fester. Clara looked from her husband's stone-cold face to the grim expression of his friend. Who is Henry Colton? Confederate Special Operations, Joshua said, his voice a low growl. He ran a unit called the Vipers. They were our opposites, our shadows. We tangled with them half a dozen times. The last time, his unit ambushed us during what was supposed to be a prisoner exchange under a flag of truce. They killed 8 of my men before we even knew what was happening. He paused, his jaw so tight Clara thought his teeth might crack. I made sure he wouldn't do it again, or so I thought. And it gets worse, Marcus added, his voice low. He knows about the whistles, Joshua. He knows our signals. He knows our methods. If Blackwood wanted to find the one man on Earth who knows how to fight us, she couldn't have picked a better weapon. Joshua turned back to his hidden cache, his movements now swift and precise. The time for reflection was over. He was a commander preparing for battle. Then we have to move faster. Marcus, send word, not just to the local boys. I want every wolf within a 3-day ride to know what's happening here. Tell them it's not a request, it's a call. And if they ask why they should risk everything they've built for one little ranch, Joshua stopped what he was doing and looked straight at Clara, his eyes burning with an intensity that almost buckled her knees. Then he turned back to Marcus. You tell them it was never about the ranch. It's about whether men like us ever get to live in peace. It's about whether our children get to grow up in a world where the law protects the weak or where it only serves the strong. You tell them that if Blackwood can take what's ours here, with the law on her side, then their land is next. Their homes are next. Their families are next. He reached for the captain's silver whistle, holding it up in the faint light from the mine entrance. And if they still hesitate, you tell them Sergeant Bennett is calling in every debt, every favor, every drop of blood we ever shed together. This ends here, in Silver Creek, one way or another. Marcus gave a single, sharp nod. The debate was over. It'll take 2 days to get the word out to everyone. You have one, Joshua commanded. Colton won't wait. Now that he knows I'm here, he'll come for me. He'll want to finish what we started at Cold Harbor. He tossed Marcus a heavy leather pouch that clinked with the sound of gold coins. For supplies, ammunition, medicine, get whatever you need. Don't be stingy. After Marcus had gone, melting back into the landscape as if he were never there, Clara stared at the man she had married. He was a stranger, a dangerous, calculating stranger who was preparing for a war she couldn't begin to comprehend. You're really going to do this, she whispered. You're going to fight them. I'm going to protect what's mine, he corrected, his eyes the eyes of a soldier, calculating angles, assessing risks, weighing the cost in lives. He stepped closer to her, his expression softening just a fraction. Clara, you need to understand. When this starts, it won't be clean. The man I had to be to survive the war, the things I'm capable of, you might not like what you see. She thought of their home, of the quiet life they had tried to build. She thought of the child growing inside her, a tiny secret promise of a future that was now in jeopardy. And then she thought of Mrs. Blackwood's sneering face and Sheriff Daniels's corruption. She thought of all the decent people who were being ground into dust by their greed. Show me, she said. Joshua looked confused. What? Show me how to load these guns, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Show me where I need to stand. Show me what to watch for. If you're going to fight for our home, then you're not going to do it alone. She met his astonished gaze, her own eyes blazing. I am not the delicate flower they think I am, Joshua Bennett. I chose you, I chose this life, and I will defend it, right here, beside you. For a long moment his soldier's mask crumbled. She saw the man underneath, surprised, humbled, and overwhelmed with a love so fierce it was almost painful to see. Then he smiled. It wasn't the gentle rancher's smile or the cold soldier's grin. It was something new, something that belonged only to them. All right, he said, picking up a sleek, lightweight rifle. First lesson, this is a Spencer carbine, modified for accuracy. 7 shots, 52 caliber. It'll punch a hole through just about anything at 200 yards. You load it like this. There in a forgotten mine shaft, surrounded by the ghosts of a bloody war, Clara Bennett, the society girl from back east, began to learn how to fight. She realized the simple rancher she'd fallen in love with had been a fiction, a role Joshua played in the desperate hope of finding peace. But the man who stood before her now, the complex, dangerous, honorable man who was teaching her how to defend their future, he was real, and he was worth fighting for. The sun was just beginning to kiss the tops of the eastern hills when Joshua climbed to the rocky outcrop that served as the highest point on their land. From there, you could see for miles in every direction. Clara watched from the porch of their small home, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee she couldn't taste, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her chest. He stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure silhouetted against the pale pre-dawn sky. He looked small and alone against the vast, unforgiving landscape. Then he raised the silver whistle to his lips. The sound that emerged was not the sharp, urgent signal from the town hall. This was something else entirely. It began low and mournful, a sound that spoke of loss and long-forgotten sorrows. It was the sound of wind whistling through the skeletal trees of a battlefield after the guns had fallen silent. Then the note began to climb, growing stronger, more powerful, infused with an undeniable note of command. It was no longer a lament, it was a summons, a story told in a language only a select few would understand, a story of shared hardship, of promises sealed in blood, of a brotherhood that death itself could not break. The song of the whistle rolled across the valleys, echoing off distant cliffs, carrying with an unnatural clarity in the still morning air. When he finally lowered it, the silence that followed felt heavy, charged with an electric anticipation. He waited a beat, then played again. 3 short, sharp bursts, followed by 2 long, resonant notes that hung in the air like a battle standard being unfurled. He climbed down, his face a mask of grim resolve. "It's done," he said, his voice quiet. "Now we wait." They didn't have to wait long. Within the hour, a plume of dust appeared on the horizon to the east, a lone rider pushing his horse hard. As he grew closer, Clara was shocked to recognize him. It was Samuel Chen, the quiet, unassuming man who ran the laundry in town. He was a man most people in Silver Creek barely even noticed, treating him as little more than a piece of the scenery. But the way he sat his horse, arrow straight, and the way his eyes constantly swept the terrain, spoke of a man who was far more than a simple laundryman. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, his worn clothes failing to hide the coiled strength in his frame. "Sergeant," he said, his voice crisp and his accent surprisingly refined. He gave a short, formal bow. "The silver whistle calls, I answer." Joshua clasped his hand, a world of shared history passing between them in that simple gesture. "It's good to see you, Sam. I wish it were under better circumstances." "The wolf does not choose when the hunter comes to his door," Chen replied, his words sounding like a line from an ancient poem. "My nephew is already on his way with the supplies from town, medical provisions, extra ammunition. Mrs. Blackwood has men watching Marcus's general store, but no one ever pays attention to the Chinese laundry boy." Before Clara could even process this, more dust clouds appeared. 2 riders from the north, a trio from the west, another lone rider from the south. They came not as a single group, but as individuals, trickling in from every point of the compass, all converging on this one small, isolated ranch. By midday, Clara had lost count. Men of all ages, shapes, and sizes were gathering in her yard. Some looked the part of former soldiers, with ramrod posture and hard, watchful eyes. But others were a complete surprise. There was a banker from the next county over, his suit dusty from the ride. There was a freedman who worked as a farrier, his massive arms corded with muscle. There was a half-breed tracker whose clothes were little more than rags, but who moved with the silent grace of a predator. Each one approached Joshua with the same quiet reverence, and each one spoke the same simple, powerful words. The silver whistle calls. I answer. Clara found herself organizing food and water, her home transformed into the headquarters of a secret army. The men were polite, almost shy in her presence, but she saw the way their hands never strayed far from the pistols tucked into their belts or the rifles resting against their saddles. This wasn't a reunion. It was a mobilization. She began to notice an unspoken hierarchy. The wealthy banker deferred to the quiet tracker. The prosperous cattleman who owned 1,000 acres took orders from the farrier. Whatever their station was in the world now, it meant nothing here. The only thing that mattered was the rank they had held in the Grey Wolves. Ma'am, a gruff voice startled her. She turned to find a mountain of a man with a heavily scarred face and surprisingly kind eyes. Name's William Thornton. I was Joshua's corporal. Just wanted to thank you for standing by him. Not every woman would understand this. I'm still trying to understand it myself, Clara admitted, watching Joshua across the yard. He was leaning over a hand-drawn map with Samuel Chen and the tracker. No longer her husband, the quiet rancher, but a commander planning a campaign. That's our Joshua, Thornton said with a fond, sad smile. Always trying to protect everyone, even from the truth. That man saved my life 4 times during the war. 4 times I should have been buzzard food, and he pulled me through. You don't ever forget a thing like that. You don't ever walk away when a man like that calls for help. As the sun climbed to its zenith, Clara did a final count. 43 men, just as Silas had said. 43 gray wolves had answered the call. Joshua stood before them on the porch, and a hush fell over the assembled men. The transformation was complete. This was Sergeant Bennett, the man they had followed into hell. Brothers, he said, his voice carrying easily to every man. You all know why I called. A woman named Blackwood wants to take this land. She's using crooked laws and hired guns to do it. The sheriff is in her pocket. It's the same old story. The rich and powerful trying to crush the folks just trying to get by. A low growl of agreement rumbled through the crowd. These men knew that story all too well. She's upped the stakes, Joshua continued, his voice hardening. She's brought in professional guns, and she's brought in Henry Colton. The mood shifted instantly. Men who had been relaxed a moment before now stood rigid. Hands instinctively went to weapons. Curses were muttered under breaths. The name Colton was a venomous thing. Colton and his vipers? Someone asked, his voice tight. The very same, Joshua confirmed. And he knows our ways. This isn't going to be like scaring off some local bullies. If we're not careful, this is going to be a massacre. Our massacre. Then what are we waiting for? The speaker was a lean man with hungry, predator's eyes. Let's hit them first. Hit them hard. Take the fight to Blackwood's front door before they even know we're here. No, Davis, Joshua said firmly, his authority unquestioned. That's not who we are anymore. We're not an attack dog for the Union Army. We have families. We have homes. We are builders now, not destroyers. We do this smart. We do this clean. The goal is to protect this ranch and expose Blackwood's corruption for the whole territory to see, not to start another war. He unrolled a larger map on a makeshift table. Here's the plan. Blackwood's guns for hire are camped here, 2 miles from town. Colton is keeping them separate from the local thugs. Smart. He doesn't trust them. My guess is he'll move against us tomorrow night, under the new moon. He'll try to hit us in the dark, make it look like we fired first, and have the sheriff waiting to arrest any survivors for murder. It's clean, it's legal, and it's final. How can you be so sure? Chen asked. Joshua's smile was grim and without humor. Because it's exactly what I would do. He began to lay out the battle plan. As he spoke, Clara watched in awe. The gentle man who carved wooden animals for her was gone, replaced by a military genius who saw the terrain as a living chessboard moving his men like pieces in a deadly, intricate game. Davis, you and your sharpshooters take this ridge. I want control of every approach from the north. Marcus, you'll set up a blocking position on the eastern road. Sam, you take the western flank. No one, and I mean no one, gets to this ranch without going through one of you. He assigned every man a position, every squad a specific objective, tailoring the plan to their individual skills and the lay of the land. What about the law? Someone asked. After this is done, won't they just come for us all? Let me worry about the law, Joshua said, his eyes glinting. I kept records, the kind of records that can bury a woman like Blackwood and a man like Daniels for the rest of their lives. But we have to survive the night to use them. The large group broke apart into smaller units. Men who hadn't seen each other in a decade renewed old partnerships, their movements crisp and professional as they checked their equipment and moved out to their assigned positions. Clara found herself suddenly surrounded by a small group of women she hadn't noticed arriving. They were the wives and sisters who had followed their men, understanding, as she now did, that this was a fight for all of them. You must be Clara. A woman with steel-gray hair and kind, steady eyes extended a work-roughened hand. I'm Martha Thompson, Marcus's wife. I was a field nurse during the war. Figured you might need some help with the wounded when this is all over. When it's over, not if, Clara asked, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Martha's smile was knowing and full of a grim sort of pride. Honey, I've seen what these men can do when they fight for something they believe in. The only question is how many of Mrs. Blackwood's hired guns will be left alive for the judge to sentence. As afternoon bled into evening, the ranch was transformed. It was no longer a home, it was a fortress. Defensive positions had been dug, sight lines cleared, supplies distributed. There was no chaos, no shouting, just the quiet, deadly efficiency of men who knew their business all too well. Joshua found Clara on the porch as the last rays of sun painted the mountains in hues of blood and fire. When they come, he said quietly, I need you and the other women in the root cellar. It's reinforced. It's the safest place. No, Clara said, the word flat and absolute. Joshua blinked, taken aback by her tone. Clara, this isn't a discussion. Yes, it is, she interrupted, stepping closer to him, her eyes boring into his. I have spent the entire day learning how to use a rifle. I know this land as well as you do. This is my home, too. I will not hide in a hole in the ground while you and these men fight for our future. She placed a hand on her belly. For our son's future. I stand with you, Joshua, or we both walk away from this ranch tonight. The choice is yours. He studied her face, seeing the unyielding Morrison's stubbornness that had led her to him in the first place. A slow, reluctant smile touched his lips. You are going to be the death of me, woman. No, she said, her voice softening as she reached up to touch his face. I'm going to be the reason you live. Someone has to watch your back while you're busy watching everyone else's. The silver whistle, hanging from the leather cord around his neck, caught the last dying light of the day. Around them, in the gathering dusk, 43 gray wolves were prepared to make their last stand. Henry Colton was coming. He thought he was coming to hunt a lone, simple farmer. He was about to find out that he had walked into a den of wolves, and the hunt was about to begin. The dawn broke a violent, bloody red, as if the sky itself was weeping for the day to come. Clara stood on the porch beside Joshua, a Spencer carbine held tight in her hands. In the distance, dust clouds were rising, not the single plume of a lone rider, but a dozen, organized and moving with grim purpose. They're early, Joshua observed, his voice a low, calm rumble that did little to soothe the frantic beating of Clara's heart. Colton's not waiting for nightfall. He's changing the plan, pressing his advantage. It's a smart move. A single, sharp crack of a rifle echoed from the northern ridge. It wasn't a shot fired in anger. It was a signal. Davis and his men had eyes on the enemy. They were coming. Riding at the head of the column was Mrs. Blackwood herself, dressed in severe black, perched on her horse like a vulture queen, surveying her domain. Beside her, Sheriff Daniels looked pale and uncomfortable, his tarnished badge winking in the morning sun like a cheap lie. Behind them rode 24 men, their faces hard, their movements disciplined. These were not local thugs. These were Colton's professionals, and at their head, a man who sat his horse like he was born on it. Older, grayer, with a face that was a roadmap of old battles, but it was unmistakably him. Colton, Joshua breathed, the name a curse. The man's eyes swept the terrain, missing nothing, his professional gaze assessing every rock, every dip in the land. When those cold eyes finally landed on the ranch house and the two figures standing on the porch, something passed between him and Joshua, a flicker of recognition, a flare of old, undying hatred, and strangely, a sliver of what looked like professional respect, an acknowledgement from one old wolf to another. They halted just outside of effective rifle range. Mrs. Blackwood's smug expression was clear even from this distance. She expected them to be terrified. She expected a swift, brutal surrender. "Bennett!" Sheriff Daniels called out, his voice trying and failing to sound authoritative. "In the name of the law, you are under arrest for threatening behavior, destruction of property, and conspiracy to incite violence." "That's a long list of charges, Sheriff," Joshua called back, his voice calm and carrying easily in the still air. "Especially since I've been right here all night, with 43 witnesses to prove it." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Mrs. Blackwood's face. She scanned the ranch, her eyes narrowing. The yard was empty. The windows were dark. The land seemed deserted, except for the lone man and woman on the porch. 43 witnesses? She scoffed, recovering her composure. "I see no one but your delusional wife, Bennett. Have you finally lost your mind?" "Ma'am," Colton spoke for the first time, his voice a soft Virginia drawl that was more menacing than any shout. "I'd recommend we proceed with caution. This setup, it's too perfect, too quiet. It feels like a trap." "Nonsense!" Mrs. Blackwood snapped, clearly annoyed. "You told me Bennett was dangerous. I see nothing but a frightened farmer trying to bluff his way out of justice." But Colton wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on Joshua. "Sergeant Bennett," he called out, his voice sharp, "that whistle you used to call your men. That was Captain Wade's, wasn't it? I'd recognize that silver tone anywhere." "It was," Joshua confirmed. "He gave it to me at Antietam, right after your Vipers ambushed our medical convoy and slaughtered wounded men." "That was war, Sergeant," Colton said simply. "This doesn't have to be." Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed with fury. "I am not paying you to reminisce, Mr. Colton. Do the job you were hired to do. Now." Colton let out a long, weary sigh. It was the sound of a man who had seen too much death and was about to see more. "Very well, but ma'am, when this all goes to hell, and believe me it will, remember that you were the one who ordered it." He raised his hand, and his men began to spread out in a practiced, flanking maneuver, intending to encircle the house and barn. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each man covering the other, a textbook example of professional skill. And that's when the prairie came alive. From camouflage pits dug overnight, from behind rocks and rises that looked too small to hide a child, the gray wolves rose. Not all at once, in a dramatic but foolish charge. They emerged in stages, a ripple of movement across the landscape. One group would appear, rifles already at their shoulders, covering the next group as they rose. In less than 30 seconds, the situation had completely reversed. Mrs. Blackwood's force was no longer the predator surrounding its prey. They were the ones who were surrounded. "Dear God," Sheriff Daniels whispered, his face turning the color of curdled milk. He recognized the faces now. The banker from the next county, the freedman farrier, the Chinese laundryman. All the people he had dismissed, ignored, or abused, now standing against him with steady rifles and even steadier eyes. Mrs. Blackwood's horse shied as she jerked the reins in shock. "This is impossible. Where did they all come from?" "We've been here all along, Mrs. Blackwood." Marcus Thompson's voice rang out from his position on a nearby hill. "You just never bothered to see us. You were too busy counting your money to notice the men and women who actually built this territory with their own hands." Colton, to his credit, didn't flinch. His hands stayed clear of his weapons as his eyes darted around, assessing the new, disastrous reality of his situation. Well played, Bennett, he called out, his voice almost conversational. The old Cherokee Sunrise formation, if I'm not mistaken. Very effective. We made a few improvements, Joshua acknowledged. Stand down, Colton. It's over. This doesn't have to end in blood. You and I both know it does, Sergeant, Colton replied, his voice filled with a profound sadness. It always does with men like us. We are what they made us. Tools of violence, dressed up to look like civilization. We can choose to be more, Joshua said, and Clara heard the unshakable conviction in his voice. You fought with honor once, Henry. You can choose to do so again. The world seemed to hold its breath. Two armies balanced on the razor's edge of all-out war. Then one of Colton's men, a younger man, his nerves clearly frayed, made a mistake. His horse shifted, his hand twitched, dropping instinctively toward the pistol on his hip. In an instant, 43 rifles swung to target him. The sound of 43 hammers being cocked was a single, deadly click that echoed across the valley. Nobody moves! Joshua's voice cracked like a whip. First man to draw dies. The second man dies a heartbeat later. We have overlapping fields of fire, we have the high ground, and we have men who have sent more souls to judgment than you've had hot dinners. Think very, very carefully about your next choice. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. Clara found herself holding her breath, her own rifle aimed at a boy who couldn't be more than 20, a boy hired to play a man's deadly game. Mrs. Blackwood, Joshua continued, his eyes never leaving Colton. You wanted to see what I really am. Take a good look. I am a man who has killed for far worse reasons than protecting his home and his family. And I will do it again if you force my hand. But I am also a man who is tired of killing, who wants nothing more than to live in peace. The choice is yours. This is outrageous, she shrieked, her composure finally shattering. Sheriff, do something. Arrest them. But Sheriff Daniels was staring at Samuel Chen, who had a rifle aimed directly at his chest, his expression serene and utterly lethal. I think we should all just calm down and discuss this like civilized folks, the sheriff stammered. Civilized? William Thornton's deep laugh boomed from his position. That's a rich word coming from a man who's been taking Blackwood's bribes for 3 years straight. We've got the receipts, Daniels. Every payment, every dirty deal, every time you looked the other way while she ruined an honest family. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Colton's men began to exchange uneasy glances, the first seeds of doubt planted. Maybe they weren't on the side of the law after all. You're bluffing, Mrs. Blackwood said, but her voice was thin, uncertain. Am I? Joshua reached into his shirt and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. Inside this pouch are sworn statements from 24 families you've ruined, bank records showing your payments to the sheriff, and a signed confession from your man, Tom Garrett, detailing the entire tax fraud scheme. He gave her a cold, merciless smile. You wanted to fight with paper and laws, ma'am. Fine, but you should have remembered that good soldiers keep very, very good records. Colton, who had been silent, finally spoke. Ma'am, my professional advice is this. You have been comprehensively outmaneuvered. I suggest you accept whatever terms Sergeant Bennett offers, because if this fight starts, most of my men won't live to see noon, and that includes you. You coward, she spat. I paid you to fight. You paid me to deal with a simple rancher, Colton corrected her, his voice hard. This is not simple, and that is no rancher. That is a gray wolf alpha, standing on his own ground, with his entire pack at his back. I've seen what happens when you corner a wolf in its den. It is not pretty, and it is not survivable. The standoff held, the tension ratcheting up with every passing second. Then a new sound, the thundering of many horses coming from the road behind Mrs. Blackwood's position. Everyone tensed, swinging their weapons toward the new threat. But at the head of this new column was not another enemy. It was Judge Harold McKenna, Silas's younger and far more respectable brother. And behind him rode a dozen grim-faced territorial marshals. The federal law had arrived. They spread out with practiced efficiency, creating a third side to the triangle, effectively boxing in Blackwood's forces. Nobody shoots! The judge's voice boomed with the undeniable weight of legitimate authority. "This is a federal matter now. Agatha Blackwood, Sheriff Daniel Daniels, you are both under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, racketeering, and a dozen other charges that will keep you busy for a very long time." The collective sigh of relief was a physical thing. Clara felt her knees go weak, the heavy rifle suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was over. No one had to die. "You planned this," Colton said to Joshua, his voice tinged with something that sounded like admiration. "The whole thing. You knew I'd attack early. You knew she'd overplay her hand. You knew the judge was on his way." Joshua just shrugged. "A good soldier always plans for every possibility. You taught me that, Henry." As the marshals moved in to disarm Colton's stunned men and place Mrs. Blackwood under arrest, her composure finally crumbled into shrieking madness. "You can't do this to me. I own this town. I own all of you." "No, ma'am," Judge McKenna said, his voice cold. "You own property. These people," he gestured to the gray wolves emerging from their positions, "they own something far more valuable. They own each other's loyalty, and that is something all your money could never buy." Joshua came to stand beside Claire on the porch, his presence solid and warm and blessedly alive. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, I am." Around them, the men who had prepared for a bloody battle were now laughing, clapping each other on the back, the tension draining away to be replaced by the quiet, fierce joy of a victory won without firing a shot. The gray wolves had answered the whistle one last time, and in doing so, they had finally, truly, won their peace. The courthouse in Silver Creek was packed to the rafters. 2 months had passed, and the trial of Agatha Blackwood was the only thing anyone talked about. Clara sat in the front row, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her belly, which was now impossible to hide. One by one, the people Mrs. Blackwood had terrorized took the stand. Ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, all telling the same story of intimidation, corruption, and greed. The paper trail uncovered by the gray wolves was undeniable, a meticulous record of a criminal empire. Joshua's testimony was quiet, factual, and devastatingly effective. But the final nail in the coffin was Henry Colton. Given immunity for his testimony, the old Confederate soldier sat in the witness chair and laid bare the entire plot, his voice heavy with the weariness of a man who had finally chosen a different path. "She hired me to eliminate Joshua Bennett," he said bluntly, the word eliminate silencing the entire courtroom. "She knew he was the only one with the courage to stand against her. She wanted him dead." He looked directly at Joshua. "She thought my old grudge would make me eager for the job. She was wrong. The war's been over for 12 years. When I saw Sergeant Bennett standing on that porch, ready to die for his home, surrounded by men who would die with him, I remembered what it was like to fight for something that mattered more than money." The verdict was swift. Mrs. Blackwood was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. Her assets were seized, to be used as restitution for the families she had ruined. Sheriff Daniels got 10 years. The reign of terror was officially over. As they left the courthouse, Colton approached them in the crowded square. "I'm heading west," he said to Joshua. "California, maybe. Somewhere the ghosts don't follow so close." "Good luck, Henry," Joshua said, and he meant it. "That whistle," Colton said, pausing. "The silver one. It means more than just a call to arms, doesn't it?" "It means brothers stand together," Joshua replied. "It means promises are kept. It means no one has to fight alone." "I had something like that once," Colton said softly. "Lost it somewhere along the way." He gave a small, sad smile and disappeared into the crowd. The town square was a scene of jubilation. The gray wolves and their families were celebrating. The banker, the farrier, the laundryman, all just ordinary citizens again, their secret lives packed away once more. Judge McKenna approached Joshua. "The territorial governor wants a new sheriff in Silver Creek," the judge said. "Someone with integrity, someone who can't be bought. He asked me to offer you the job." Joshua looked stunned. "Me? Judge, I'm just a rancher." "Think about it, son," McKenna urged. "Sometimes the best man to keep the peace is the one who's already proven he's willing to fight for it. Later, as they walked to their wagon, Clara asked him, "Would you do it? Would you be the sheriff?" Joshua pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her belly. "I have everything I've ever wanted right here," he said. "A home, a wife I love, a child on the way. Why would I want to complicate that with a badge?" "Because you're a protector, Joshua," Clara said simply. "It's who you are. And these people, they need you." He was quiet for a long moment as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors of orange and purple. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "But for tonight, I just want to go home." The silver whistle still hung around his neck, catching the last light of day. Its song was silent now. Its call had been answered. Its purpose had been served. The gray wolves had risen not for war, but for justice. And for the first time in a long time, the valley was finally at peace. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching her two children play in the yard. 4-year-old Thomas, who had his father's steady gaze, and 2-year-old Sarah, who had her mother's fiery spirit. Silver Creek had prospered. The schoolhouse, built with Mrs. Blackwood's confiscated funds, was full of children, and the sheriff's badge was pinned to the vest of a man who wore it with quiet, reluctant dignity. A group of riders appeared on the horizon. It was the anniversary. Every year on this day they came. The Gray Wolves. Not as soldiers, but as family. Marcus, William, Samuel, and all the others, their wives and children in tow, for a celebration of the peace they had won together. As the sun began to set, Joshua stood before them all. He pulled out the silver whistle. 5 years ago, he said, his voice carrying over the laughing children in quiet conversation, we answered a call. We stood together when standing alone would have meant our destruction. We meet today not to remember a battle, but to remember a promise. That strength comes from unity. That honor is worth more than gold. That no one has to fight alone. He raised the whistle to his lips and played the calling song. One by one, the other men pulled out their own whistles, silver, brass, even some carved from wood, and joined in. The melody rolled across the peaceful valley, a symphony of remembrance, a promise passed down to the next generation. As the last note faded, little Sarah climbed into her father's lap. "Tell the story, Papa," she demanded. Joshua smiled, settling her against his chest as the other children gathered around. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a simple rancher who just wanted to live in peace." Clara watched him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The world had tried to shame her for marrying a simple rancher. They never knew. They never understood that she had married a king, a man whose army was invisible, whose loyalty was absolute, and whose love was the truest and strongest thing in her world. She had chosen this life, this man, and she would choose him again, 1,000 times over. And if you enjoyed this story, if you believe that good people standing together can change the world, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the story of the Silver Whistle is just one of many, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.